You won't believe what happened when a Karen and her entitled son decided to storm into my garage and claim my Lamborghini was theirs. No, really. They actually thought they could waltz in, point at my car, and scream, "That's my son's car." Dylan, the son, was even live streaming this wild scene for his audience, calling me a thief, while his mom, the self-proclaimed HOA queen, demanded I hand over the keys. But here's the twist. This neighborhood drama went way further than they ever imagined. Ever had a run-in with a crazy Karen or a ridiculous HOA? Drop your story in the comments below because, trust me, you'll want to hear how this one ends. Stick around, it's about to get really interesting. It was a perfect Sunday morning in September, and I was washing my pride and joy in the garage. The Lamborghini Huracan Evo gleamed under the lights. I'd owned it for over a year now, my reward after 8 years of grinding as a freelance architect. The morning sun streamed through the open garage door, and life felt pretty good. I was wearing my favorite old Eagles t-shirt and cargo shorts, enjoying the peaceful weekend. The neighborhood was quiet except for distant lawn mowers and the occasional dog bark. Perfect serenity until 9:15 a.m., when everything went to hell. I heard footsteps approaching my driveway and glanced up to see a lanky 19-year-old kid with bleached hair standing at the edge of my garage. His eyes were locked on my car like he'd discovered buried treasure. Before I could even speak, he whipped out his phone and started recording. "Yo, what's up everyone? Check out my Lamborghini," he announced with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. The kid had that entitled energy that made your skin crawl. Comments started flooding his live stream immediately. "No way, Dylan. That's sick, bro. Take us for a ride." I stood there completely bewildered. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, stepping forward. Dylan looked at me like I was interrupting his moment of glory. "Oh hey, thanks for washing my car, dude," he said with a smirk. "Appreciate the service." I blinked twice, certain I'd misheard him. "Your car? Son, this is my Lamborghini. I bought it, I own it, and I have all the paperwork to prove it." Dylan's livestream chat was going wild now. Hundreds of comments were scrolling by faster than I could read them. "This old dude thinks my car is his," Dylan announced to his audience, turning the phone to show me on camera. "Can you believe this guy?" The comments were egging him on. "Call the cops. Get your car back. Don't let him steal it." I pulled out my wallet and showed Dylan my registration and insurance card. "Look, I don't know what kind of joke this is, but this car is legally mine. See? Marcus Thompson, that's me." Dylan barely glanced at the documents before waving them away. "Those papers are probably fake anyway," he said with a shrug. "Anyone can print stuff like that these days." His live stream viewers were eating this up. The view count had jumped to over 400 people, all watching this bizarre confrontation unfold. "You know what?" Dylan said, his confidence growing with every encouraging comment. "I'm calling my mom. She's the HOA president here, and she doesn't mess around with car thieves." My stomach dropped. An HOA president? In my 3 years living in Willowbrook Estate, I'd managed to avoid most community politics. I paid my dues, kept my lawn trimmed, and minded my own business. Dylan hit the speaker button and dialed. The phone rang twice before a woman's voice answered with all the warmth of an Arctic wind. "Dylan, honey, what's wrong?" "Mom," Dylan practically shouted, "that neighbor stole my Lamborghini. You need to get over here right now." There was a moment of silence, followed by what sounded like furniture being knocked over. "What?" "I'm coming immediately." The line went dead, and Dylan grinned at me like he'd just played his ace card. "You're in trouble now, old man," he said, still live streaming. "My mom runs this entire neighborhood." I looked around and noticed neighbors starting to peek out of their windows. Mrs. Chen from across the street was standing on her porch, trying to figure out what the commotion was about, but it was Henry Goldstein, my 65-year-old neighbor, who caught my attention. Henry was standing in his front yard with his morning coffee, watching with concern mixed with resignation. Something about his expression told me he knew exactly who Dylan's mother was, and that I was about to experience something unpleasant. "Here she comes!" Dylan announced gleefully, pointing across the street. I turned to see a woman in her late 30s, marching toward my house with the determination of a general leading troops into battle. She was wearing torn jeans and an oversized hoodie, marching toward me and exuding confidence like she owned the place. But what struck me most was the sheer authority radiating from her every step. This was a woman who believed she owned the world, or at least this corner of it. As she got closer, I could see the fury in her eyes and the way her jaw was set in determination. She had that particular look that every customer service representative had learned to fear, the look of someone about to demand a manager. Dylan was practically bouncing with excitement, still live streaming for his growing audience. "This is going to be epic, guys," he told his viewers. "My mom's about to lay down the law." I glanced at Henry, who was slowly walking over with his coffee mug, clearly deciding he needed to be part of whatever was about to happen. Something told me my peaceful Sunday morning was about to become a memory, and that I was about to meet the final boss of all Karens. The woman was now just 20 feet away, already pulling out her phone, presumably to start documenting whatever confrontation she was planning. I could see the fake designer bag swinging at her side, and the way she carried herself like royalty approaching her subjects. Dylan was still narrating to his live stream. "Wait till you see my mom in action. She doesn't take crap from anybody." Henry reached the edge of my driveway just as the woman stepped onto my property, her eyes locked on mine with laser focus. "Get ready," Henry muttered under his breath. "Hurricane Dolores is about to make landfall." And that's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with an entitled teenager and his helicopter mom. I was about to face off against someone who genuinely believed she had the power to control my life. The morning sun was still shining, my Lamborghini was still gleaming, but everything was about to change in ways I couldn't imagine. The woman who introduced herself as Dolores Tatum arrived at my driveway like a storm making landfall. She was shorter than I'd expected, but she carried herself with the presence of someone twice her size. Her first words weren't a greeting. They were a declaration of war. "As the HOA president of Willowbrook Estate, I demand an explanation for what's happening here," she announced, her voice carrying across the entire neighborhood. Dylan immediately ran behind his mother like she was his personal bodyguard. "Mom, this old guy stole my Lamborghini and won't give it back," he whined, pointing at me like I was a criminal. Dolores's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down, clearly sizing me up as a threat to whatever authority she thought she wielded. "Show me your papers." "Now," she demanded, pulling out her phone and opening what appeared to be some kind of app, though I suspected it was just her notes. "I'm documenting this incident for official HOA violations." I took a deep breath and tried to remain calm. "Ma'am, I'm Marcus Thompson, and I live at 1249 Maple Drive. This is my car, which I purchased legally. Here's my registration, insurance, and title." I handed her the same documents I'd shown Dylan, hoping an adult would be more reasonable. Dolores examined the papers with the intensity of a detective, turning them over and squinting at every detail. "These look suspicious to me," she finally declared. "Anyone can forge documents these days." I felt my patience starting to fray. "Ma'am, those are official state documents. You can call the DMV to verify them." Dolores scoffed and started typing on her phone. "Violation number 1, harboring stolen property," she announced as she typed. "Violation number 2, disturbing community peace. Violation number 3, failure to cooperate with HOA investigation." Henry had wandered over during this exchange, sipping his coffee and watching with detached interest. "Morning, Dolores," he said pleasantly. "Morning, Dylan. Marcus, everything okay here?" Dolores immediately turned on Henry with laser focus. "This doesn't concern you, Henry," she snapped. "I'm handling an official HOA matter." Henry raised his eyebrows. "Well, since I'm part of this HOA and live right next door, I'd say it concerns me." "I'm the president here," Dolores practically shrieked. "I handle these situations." Henry nodded thoughtfully. "Of course, Dolores. What section of the HOA bylaws covers vehicle ownership verification? I don't recall reading that." Dolores's face flushed red, and I could tell Henry had hit a nerve. "The bylaws give me discretionary authority to investigate suspicious activities," she said, sounding less certain. Dylan was getting restless and had started recording again, trying to be sneaky about it. "Mom, just make him give me back my car," he whined. "This is taking forever." Dolores shot her son a withering look, then turned back to me with renewed determination. "Mr. Thompson," she said, emphasizing my name like it was distasteful, "you have exactly 24 hours to provide additional proof of ownership for this vehicle." She gestured at my Lamborghini like it was personally offensive. "I know Police Chief Morrison personally, and I can have this investigated quickly if you don't cooperate." I felt something cold in my stomach. "Ma'am, what additional proof are you looking for? I've shown you everything the state requires." Dolores smiled, but it was the kind of smile a shark gives before biting. "We have certain standards in this community, Mr. Thompson. We can't be too careful about suspicious activities or people who might not belong here." The implication was crystal clear, and it made my blood boil. "Are you suggesting I don't belong in the neighborhood I've lived in for 3 years? Dolores pulled herself up to her full height. "I'm suggesting that people who can't explain expensive possessions might not be the kind of residents we want here." Dylan was nodding enthusiastically, clearly loving his mother's performance. "Yeah, it's super suspicious," he added. Henry stepped closer to our group. "Dolores, I don't think the HOA has authority to question how residents acquire legal property, Dolores whirled on Henry like he'd challenged her to a duel. Henry, you don't understand my responsibilities as president. I have to protect this community from threats. She turned back to me with that predatory smile. Mr. Thompson, I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night at 7 p.m. We'll be discussing your situation with the full board. The way she said situation made it sound like I was a disease needing eradication. If you choose not to attend, she continued, we'll proceed without you. Dylan was practically bouncing. Mom's gonna get you kicked out, he said gleefully. Then I can get my car back. I looked around at the neighbors who had gathered to watch. Some looked uncomfortable, but others seemed to buy into Dolores's narrative. Mrs. Chen was whispering to Mrs. Patterson, both shooting concerned glances my way. Mr. Rodriguez looked skeptical but wasn't saying anything. I realized Dolores had just turned my quiet morning into a public trial, with me as the defendant in a case I didn't understand. Henry caught my eye and gave a small nod. Well, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, this should be an interesting meeting. Dolores looked triumphant as she walked back toward her house, Dylan trailing behind like a devoted puppy. Henry waited for everyone else to leave before approaching me. Marcus, he said quietly, that woman has terrorized this neighborhood for years. But don't give up yet. Come by my place tomorrow morning. There are some things about your family name that might interest you. Monday dragged by like a prison sentence. I spent the day trying to focus on work, but my mind kept wandering to the confrontation with Dolores. By late afternoon, I'd received 3 phone calls from neighbors about the incident. Mrs. Chen called to express concerns about neighborhood safety, while Mr. Rodriguez was more direct. Marcus, this whole thing sounds like nonsense, but Dolores has been calling everyone. The worst part was watching Dylan make multiple trips past my house, always recording something. When 7 p.m. rolled around, I walked into the community center feeling like I was heading to my execution. The building was modest, a converted ranch house with fluorescent lighting and folding chairs around a scratched wooden table. Dolores had positioned herself at the head like a judge, with papers, a laptop, and a poster board covered in photos. She'd spent considerable time preparing. Dylan sat to her right, phone propped up to live stream to his drama-hungry audience. The turnout was robust, about 15 people, apparently the largest HOA gathering in recent memory. Thank you for coming to this emergency session, Dolores began, her voice carrying courtroom authority. Tonight we address a serious situation threatening our community's safety and integrity. She gestured toward her poster board containing photos of my house, garage, and multiple angles of my Lamborghini. This man, she continued, pointing at me like evidence in a murder trial, has been harboring suspicious property and showing complete disregard for community standards. Dylan was nodding enthusiastically, checking his phone for live stream comments. Several neighbors were also recording, meaning whatever happened would be all over social media within hours. Fellow residents, Dolores continued, consulting her notes like a prosecutor, I've documented multiple violations. First, suspicious vehicle ownership that cannot be adequately explained. Second, uncooperative behavior with HOA leadership. Third, creating disturbances that have upset family. She looked around with the satisfaction of someone saving the community from danger. I move for an official warning and require additional documentation within 48 hours or face removal from Willowbrook Estate. The room erupted in murmurs. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand. This doesn't seem right, Dolores. I stood up, feeling every eye in the room. I'd like to respond to these accusations, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Dolores looked annoyed I was interrupting her show. You have 3 minutes, she said curtly. I pulled out my folder of documents. I'm Marcus Thompson. I've lived here 3 years. I'm a freelance architect, and I bought this car with money I earned. Here's my title, registration, insurance, loan documents, and purchase receipt. I held up each document, but some neighbors had already decided. Henry raised his hand from the back. Dolores, I'd like to see the HOA bylaws giving you authority to investigate residents' property. Dolores's expression flickered. That's not necessary, Henry. We're dealing with a security matter. Henry stood up, holding a binder. I've got the HOA bylaws right here. He opened it and read clearly. Section 4.2. The HOA has no authority to restrict vehicle ownership based on type, value, or quantity. Section 6.1. Criminal accusations must be reported to law enforcement, not adjudicated by HOA. The room fell silent as Henry's words sank in. Several neighbors looked confused, realizing Dolores might not have the authority she claimed. But Dolores wasn't finished. There are also community standards to consider, patterns of behavior creating resident concern. She addressed the room directly. Mrs. Chen, wouldn't you feel safer knowing expensive items are legitimately owned? Mrs. Chen nodded nervously. I want my grandchildren safe. Dolores smiled triumphantly. Mr. Rodriguez, you understand security vigilance, right? Mr. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable but nodded. We can't be too careful. I watched in amazement as Dolores systematically manipulated each person, playing on fears to build a case against me. Dylan was loving every moment, his live stream chat going wild. Henry tried once more for sanity. Dolores, this sounds like a witch hunt. This man has lived here peacefully for 3 years, pays dues, maintains property, and broken no laws. But Dolores had momentum. As elected president, I have responsibility to protect our community from problems before they escalate. She looked around confidently. I call for a vote. All in favor of issuing an official warning? Hands went up, not all, but enough. Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Chen, Mr. Wilson, and 3 others. All opposed? Henry's hand shot up, along with Mr. Rodriguez and Mrs. Franklin. The motion passes 7-5, Dolores announced with satisfaction. As the meeting broke up, I felt convicted by people who decided my guilt before hearing evidence. Most neighbors filed out quickly, avoiding eye contact like I carried social disease. Dylan was already posting live stream highlights, spinning it as his mother's heroic victory. Henry waited for everyone to leave before approaching me in the parking lot. Marcus, he said quietly, I'm sorry about that circus. That woman has terrorized this neighborhood for years, but tonight she went too far. I felt exhausted and defeated. Henry, I'm starting to think it might be easier to sell the car and move. Henry's eyes twinkled with mischief. Don't give up yet, son. Come by tomorrow morning, bring coffee. There are things about your family name that might interest you. Tuesday morning found me standing on Henry's front porch at exactly 9 a.m., carrying 2 cups of coffee and a head full of questions. I had barely slept the night before, replaying the humiliating HOA meeting over and over in my mind. Dylan had apparently posted edited highlights from his live stream, because I'd woken up to find my phone buzzing with notifications from neighbors, friends, and even some clients who'd seen the video. Henry's house was a neat colonial with a well-maintained garden and an American flag hanging from the front porch. When he answered the door, he was already dressed for the day in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, looking every inch the retired professional I'd always assumed he was. Come in, Marcus, he said, leading me through a living room filled with law books and toward a home office that looked like something out of a legal drama. The walls were covered with framed diplomas, old maps, and what appeared to be several decades' worth of legal documents and property records. I've been doing some research since last night, Henry said, settling behind a desk covered with manila folders and old photographs. Tell me, what do you know about your grandfather? I set down the coffee and tried to think. Robert Thompson. He died when I was 12, so I didn't know him very well. My dad always said he was a farmer who owned some land upstate, but we sold the property after he passed. Henry nodded and pulled out a black and white aerial photograph that looked like it was taken sometime in the 1960s. Take a look at this. The photograph showed vast stretches of farmland with a single farmhouse and several outbuildings, scattered across what must have been over 100 acres. In the corner, written in faded ink, were the words, Thompson Family Farm, 1967. I stared at the image, trying to process what I was seeing. Henry, this looks like it was taken right around here, but... Henry smiled and pulled out a modern satellite map of Willowbrook Estate. Look at the landmarks, Marcus. See that bend in the creek? The line of oak trees along what's now Maple Drive? Your grandfather's farm was right here. This entire neighborhood was built on Thompson family land. My coffee mug suddenly felt very heavy in my hands. You're telling me my grandfather owned all of this? Henry nodded and pulled out another document. This one looked official and legal. Robert Thompson sold 127 acres to Willowbrook Development Corporation in 1967 for the purpose of creating a residential subdivision. I felt like the floor was shifting under my feet, but if he sold it, then why are you showing me this? Henry's smile widened, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw something that looked like hope in his eyes. Because, my boy, your grandfather was smarter than the developers realized. Look at this. He handed me a thick legal document titled Land Sale Agreement with Retained Rights. The language was dense and full of legal terminology, but Henry pointed to specific sections as he explained. Your grandfather sold the development rights to his land, but he retained ownership of the underlying property. It was a complicated arrangement that let the developers build homes while keeping the Thompson family as the legal landowners. I read the highlighted sections 3 times before the implications started to sink in. According to these documents, Henry continued, the The developers were supposed to transfer full ownership to individual homeowners within 30 years, but they needed to file specific paperwork with the county to make that happen. He pulled out another folder, this one much thicker. I spent yesterday afternoon at the county clerk's office with an old friend who still works there. Guess what we discovered? My hands were actually shaking now as I reached for the folder. Inside were photocopies of county records dating back to the 1960s and 70s, with several pages highlighted in yellow. The transfer paperwork was never properly filed, Henry said quietly. According to official county records, the Thompson family still owns the underlying land rights to 28 properties in Willowbrook Estate. I stared at the list of addresses, and my eyes immediately found 1247 Maple Drive, Dolores Tatum's house. This is insane, I whispered, looking through page after page of legal documents that seemed to confirm what Henry was telling me. Are you saying I actually own the land under Dolores's house? Henry nodded solemnly. You don't just own the land under her house, Marcus. You own the land under 28 houses in this neighborhood. Technically speaking, every one of those families has been living on Thompson property for the past 57 years. I set the documents down and tried to wrap my head around the magnitude of what I was hearing. But what does that mean practically? Can I kick them out? Henry shook his head. No, nothing that dramatic. The families have residential rights that protect them from eviction. But as the underlying landowner, you do have certain legal authorities that supersede the HOA. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands, including the authority to override any HOA decisions that affect your properties. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. So when Dolores was threatening me with HOA violations and community removal, Henry's grin was infectious. She was essentially threatening to evict her own landlord from his own property. I started laughing, not because anything was particularly funny, but because the absurdity of the situation was overwhelming. Henry, this is unbelievable. How is something like this even possible? Henry pulled out his phone and showed me the contact information for a law firm downtown. I've already spoken with my former colleague, Rebecca Martinez. She specializes in property law and confirmed that these documents are legitimate and enforceable. If you want to make this official, she can file the necessary paperwork to establish your legal standing as the landowner. I looked at the stack of documents again, focusing on Dolores's address. What exactly can I do with this information? Well, Henry said thoughtfully, as the landowner, you have the right to set certain property standards, approve or disapprove major modifications, and most importantly for your current situation, you can officially override any HOA authority over your 28 properties. He paused to let that sink in. In other words, Marcus, you don't just have the right to tell Dolores she has no authority over you. You have the right to tell her she has no authority over more than half the neighborhood. Wednesday morning started with a text message that made my blood boil. Dylan had sent me a photo of a handwritten note taped to my front door, which read, "Final notice. HOA violation fine of $300 due immediately. Failure to pay will result in eviction proceedings." I walked outside and found the actual note still taped to my door, along with what appeared to be an official-looking form with multiple violations listed. Each violation carried a $100 fine, and at the bottom Dolores had written in red ink, "Payment due by end of business today or face immediate removal from Willowbrook Estate." The audacity was breathtaking, but now I had something she didn't know about, the legal ammunition to end her little power trip, permanently. I called Henry immediately and he answered on the second ring. "Marcus, I was hoping you'd call early. Rebecca Martinez can meet with us this afternoon to make your land ownership official." By 10 a.m., I was sitting in Rebecca Martinez's downtown office, a sleek space filled with legal books and certificates. Rebecca was a sharp-featured woman in her 40s who spoke with the precision of someone who'd spent decades navigating complex property law. "Mr. Thompson," she said after reviewing Henry's research, "these documents are absolutely legitimate. Your grandfather was remarkably prescient in how he structured this sale." Rebecca explained the process of officially establishing my landowner rights, which would involve filing paperwork with the county and serving notice to the affected homeowners. "The good news," she said, "is that this doesn't threaten anyone's right to live in their homes. The bad news for your HOA president is that her authority over your properties is about to evaporate completely." She estimated the process would take 48 hours to complete, which meant I'd have official documentation by Friday afternoon. That afternoon, as if on cue, Dolores decided to escalate things even further. I was working in my home office when I heard what sounded like someone pounding on my front door. Through the window, I could see Dolores standing on my porch with what appeared to be another stack of papers. When I opened the door, she thrust the documents at me without any greeting. "Mr. Thompson, You now owe $600 in HOA fines for continued. Her voice was sharp and aggressive, like she was personally offended by my existence. I'm also serving you with this notice of emergency HOA hearing scheduled for tomorrow night at 8 p.m., where we'll be voting on your permanent removal from Willowbrook Estate. Dylan was lurking behind her with his phone out, obviously recording everything for his social media audience. Dolores, I said calmly, I think you're making a much bigger mistake than you realize. Something in my tone must have gotten her attention, because she stopped shuffling papers and looked directly at me. Are you threatening me, Mr. Thompson? She asked, her voice rising. Because I want you to know that threats against HOA leadership can result in immediate police involvement. I smiled, which seemed to make her even angrier. I'm not threatening anyone, Dolores. I'm just suggesting that tomorrow night's meeting might not go the way you expect it to. She stepped closer, trying to intimidate me with her presence. Mr. Thompson, I don't think you understand the seriousness of your situation. I run this neighborhood, and people who don't follow the rules don't get to stay. Dylan was nodding enthusiastically behind her, clearly loving every moment of his mother's dominance display. Oh, I understand the situation perfectly, I replied, still smiling. In fact, I understand it better than you do. Dolores looked confused and frustrated by my calm demeanor. Tomorrow night at 8 p.m., she said, jabbing her finger at the notice. You'll have one final opportunity to explain yourself to this community before we vote you out permanently. She turned to leave, then spun back around. And Mr. Thompson, I'd suggest you start looking for somewhere else to live, because after tomorrow night, you won't be welcome in Willowbrook Estate. Dylan gave me a little wave as they walked away, his phone still recording. See you tomorrow night, car thief, he called over his shoulder. I watched them go, thinking about how much I was going to enjoy the expressions on their faces when they learned the truth. That evening, Henry came over to help me prepare for what we were now calling the reckoning. We spread the county documents across my kitchen table and organized everything into a presentation that would be clear and devastating. Marcus, Henry said as we worked, I want you to be prepared for the possibility that this is going to get ugly. When people like Dolores realize they've lost power, they don't always go quietly. I thought about that for a moment. Henry, I've been thinking about this all day. I don't want to become the kind of person who abuses power just because I can. But I also can't let her keep terrorizing this neighborhood. Henry nodded approvingly. That's exactly the right attitude, son. Use this power to stop the abuse, not to become the abuser yourself. By the time we finished organizing everything, I had a folder containing 57 years of documentation proving that I owned the land under more than half of Willowbrook Estate, including Dolores Tatum's house. Thursday evening arrived with all the anticipation of a heavyweight championship fight. By 7:30 p.m., the Willowbrook Estate Community Center was more packed than I'd ever seen it. Word had spread throughout the neighborhood about the drama, and apparently everyone wanted to witness what they expected to be my public humiliation and exile. Dylan had been promoting the event on social media all day, calling it the night my mom finally kicks out the car thief. His live stream started at 7:45 p.m., with over 1,200 viewers tuning in to watch what he promised would be epic justice. Dolores had dressed for the occasion in what I could only assume was her idea of courtroom attire. A navy blazer over jeans, and her fake designer bag positioned prominently on the table like a prop of authority. Ladies and gentlemen, Dolores began, her voice carrying the weight of someone who believed she was saving the community from a dangerous criminal. Thank you for coming to this emergency session to resolve the Marcus Thompson situation once and for all. She gestured toward a new poster board covered with even more photos of my house and car, along with what appeared to be printed screenshots from social media. As your HOA president, I have documented extensive evidence of violations, suspicious behavior, and complete disregard for community standards. Dylan was nodding along enthusiastically, his phone propped up to capture every moment for his growing online audience. I sat quietly in the back row with Henry, carrying nothing but a simple manila folder and the knowledge that I was about to turn Dolores' entire world upside down. Fellow residents, Dolores continued, consulting her notes like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. Mr. Thompson has shown us exactly who he is. He harbors expensive property he cannot adequately explain. He's been aggressive and uncooperative with legitimate HOA authority, and he's created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion in our peaceful community. She looked around the room with the satisfaction of someone who believed she held all the cards. Tonight, we're going to vote on his permanent removal from Willowbrook Estate, and I expect this community to stand together. The room murmured with agreement from about half the audience, while the other half looked uncomfortable with the whole proceeding. After 20 minutes of character assassination, Dolores finally turned to me with theatrical flair. "Mr. Thompson, this is your final opportunity to address this community before we vote." I stood up slowly, still carrying just my manila folder, and walked to the front of the room. The crowd fell silent, apparently expecting either a desperate defense or a tearful confession. Instead, I smiled calmly and opened my folder. "Thank you, Dolores, for giving me this opportunity to speak." I looked around the room at all the familiar faces, neighbors I'd lived near for 3 years. Before we discuss my future in this neighborhood, I think it's important that everyone understands the real history of Willowbrook Estate. I pulled out the first document, the 1967 aerial photograph of Thompson Family Farm. How many of you know what this land looked like before your houses were built? I held up the photograph so everyone could see the vast farmland that had once covered this entire area. This is Thompson Family Farm in 1967, 127 acres owned by my grandfather, Robert Thompson. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people tried to process what they were seeing. Dolores looked confused and irritated. Mr. Thompson, this is completely irrelevant to the violations you've committed." I smiled at her and pulled out the next document. "Actually, Dolores, this is very relevant. You see, when my grandfather sold this land to Willowbrook Development Corporation, he structured the sale in a very specific way." I showed the land sale agreement to the room. He sold the development rights while retaining ownership of the underlying property. Henry stood up from his seat in the back. "As a retired property lawyer, I can verify that these documents are legitimate and have been confirmed by the county clerk's office." Dolores was starting to look genuinely worried now. "This is irrelevant," she insisted. I pulled out the county records and held them up. According to official county records, filed in 1967 and verified this week, the Thompson family still owns the underlying land rights to 28 properties in Willowbrook Estate. The room fell completely silent, except for the sound of Dylan's live stream viewers going absolutely crazy in the comment section. "What's your address, Dolores?" I asked casually. 1247 Maple Drive, she answered automatically, then immediately looked like she regretted it. I consulted the county document and found her address on the list. "According to these official records, I own the land your house sits on." The silence in the room was deafening. Dylan's phone nearly slipped from his hands as his live stream exploded with comments. Dolores was staring at me like I'd just told her the sky was green. "That's impossible," she whispered. "You're lying. Those documents are fake." I handed the papers to Henry, who walked them over to Dolores so she could examine them herself. "Ma'am, these are certified county records with official seals and signatures." "You've been harassing your own landlord for 2 weeks," I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Every fine you've issued, every threat you've made, every violation you've claimed, you've been doing it to the person who legally owns the land your house sits on." Dolores was frantically examining the documents, her hands shaking as she read through page after page of official county records. "This can't be real," she kept repeating. Dylan had stopped live streaming and was staring at his phone in horror as his comment section filled with laughing emojis. I turned to address the entire room. "As the legal landowner of these 28 properties, I hereby revoke HOA authority over my land, effective immediately." The crowd erupted in chaos. Some people were applauding, others were demanding to see the documents. Dolores stood up shakily, her face pale. "You can't do this to us," she said. "This is our home." But Dylan wasn't ready to accept defeat. "This is all fake," he screamed, jumping up from his chair. "You made all this up." He lunged toward me with his phone raised like a weapon, clearly intending to either hit me or destroy the documents. "I'll destroy everything!" Henry immediately called 911, while several neighbors moved to restrain Dylan, but the kid was in full meltdown mode. "You ruined my life," he shouted. When Officer Martinez arrived 5 minutes later, Dylan was still ranting about fake documents while Dolores sat in her chair, staring at the county records with the expression of someone whose entire world had just collapsed. "Son," Officer Martinez said to Dylan, "I need you to calm down right now." But Dylan was beyond reason. When the officer approached, Dylan shoved him and screamed, "You're all corrupt!" The handcuffs came out immediately. "Dylan Tatum, you're under arrest for assault and resisting arrest." As Dylan was led away, still shouting, Dolores finally looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "How did this happen?" she whispered. Friday morning brought a silence to Willowbrook Estate that felt almost surreal after weeks of drama and confrontation. I woke up to find that Dylan's arrest video had gone viral overnight, with nearly 2.3 million views across various social media platforms. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of me, with thousands of people sharing their own HOA horror stories and celebrating what they saw as perfect karma. Dylan's social media accounts had been deactivated sometime during the night, presumably after the backlash became too intense for him to handle. By noon, there was a for rent sign in Dolores's front yard, and neighbors were already gossiping about how quickly she was planning to leave Willowbrook Estate. The legal aftermath was swift and decisive. Dylan was charged with assault, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest, facing potential jail time and mandatory community service. I chose not to press for the maximum penalties, telling the prosecutor that I believed the kid could learn from this experience if given the chance. The judge sentenced him to 120 hours of community service at a local animal shelter, along with anger management classes and a year of probation. Dolores was required to publicly apologize as part of our settlement agreement, posting a formal statement on the neighborhood Facebook group. Henry was unanimously elected as the new interim HOA president at an emergency meeting held the following week. I donated $5,000 to the community for playground improvements and landscaping. My grandfather would have wanted this land to make families happy, I told Henry as we watched children playing on the new swing set. 2 months after the confrontation, I was washing my Lamborghini in the garage when a moving truck pulled up to Dolores's old house. A young family with 2 small children climbed out of a minivan, clearly excited about their new home. Their teenage son immediately noticed my car and walked over with respectful curiosity. "Excuse me, sir," he said politely. "That's an incredible car. How long have you lived in this neighborhood?" I smiled and set down my microfiber cloth. "My family's been here since before this neighborhood existed," I told him. "My grandfather owned the farm that became Willowbrook Estate." The kid's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "That's so cool. Do you have any pictures of what it looked like back then?" For the next 20 minutes, I found myself telling the story of Thompson Family Farm to an appreciative audience of 3 kids who thought it was amazing that they were living on land that had once been a working farm. Dylan's transformation was perhaps the most surprising part of the whole saga. 6 weeks into his community service at the animal shelter, he approached me outside the grocery store one Saturday afternoon. He looked different. Cleaner, more mature, and definitely humbler than the arrogant kid who'd tried to steal my car on social media. "Mr. Thompson," he said quietly, "I owe you a real apology, not just for the arrest stuff, but for everything. You didn't deserve any of what we put you through." I studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity, but he seemed genuinely remorseful. "How's the community service going, Dylan?" I asked. "Actually, really good," he replied, sounding surprised by his own answer. "Turns out I'm pretty good with animals, and the work makes me feel like I'm actually contributing something positive for once." Dolores herself had moved to a modest apartment across town and taken a job at a local department store. The few times I'd encountered her at the grocery store or bank, she'd been polite but distant, clearly embarrassed by the whole situation. Henry told me that she'd mentioned to Mrs. Chen that the experience had been a wake-up call about what really matters in life. I bore her no ill will. In fact, I hoped she'd find some peace and perspective in her new circumstances. 6 months after the confrontation, Willowbrook Estate had transformed into the kind of community I'd always hoped it could be. The annual Thompson family BBQ became a neighborhood tradition, held in the small park where my grandfather's farmhouse had once stood. I installed a bronze plaque near the playground that read, "Thompson Family Farm, established 1862, Willowbrook Estate, building community since 1967. The Lamborghini had become something of a neighborhood mascot, no longer a source of suspicion and conflict, but a symbol of how hard work and perseverance could pay off. I regularly gave rides to elderly neighbors who needed transportation to medical appointments, and the car was always a hit at the annual block party. Local kids loved having their pictures taken with it, and I enjoyed telling them about saving money and working toward goals. As I sat in my garage one Saturday evening, polishing the orange paint that had started this whole adventure, Henry wandered over with 2 cups of coffee. "You know what the best part of this whole story is?" he asked, settling into a lawn chair beside my workbench. "That justice won?" I suggested. Henry shook his head with a smile. "No, Marcus. The best part is that you never had to become the bad guy to beat one. You used the truth and a little patience, and you let Dolores destroy herself with her own behavior." I thought about that for a moment, looking at the county documents that had changed everything, now framed and hanging on my garage wall next to a photo of my grandfather's farm. "Sometimes," I said, "the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be a victim and insist on the truth." Henry raised his coffee cup in a toast. To Robert Thompson, who was apparently smarter than any of us realized. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the neighborhood that my family had owned for nearly 60 years, grateful that sometimes karma has a way of making everything work out exactly as it should. Sometimes real power doesn't come from making people afraid of you. It comes from standing up for what's right, even when the whole world seems to be against you. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, The truth is powerful enough to set everything straight.